Hey guys and gals, Thomas here, the Untamed Ambition. Today I'm planting some shrubs. I just wanted to give you kind of a quick rundown and sort of a how-to on how to utilize these shrub survival kits as well as the tree survival kits. They're essentially the same setup with one minor difference towards the end, and we'll get to that here in a minute. Just try to be more connected with your environment. Try to be more connected with your food. First things first, I want to show you what is included with these survival kits. So you're going to have either a tree or a shrub tube, and if you specify when you order, we can either do a solid tube or a split tube like this. The split tubes ship a lot easier, they're a little bit cheaper to ship. With the shrubs, I'm kind of indifferent. The solid tube's a little bit quicker to install. Not that much quicker, not that big of a difference. With the trees, I'm a big fan of the split tubes because we'll actually leave that tube on the tree until the tree outgrows it and pushes it open. We're going to hold this together with reusable zip ties, and eventually those zip ties will just open up on their own. But one way or another, you're going to have a tube. You're going to have a plastic weed mat. Now, if you order more than one kit, these are going to come in a roll. There'll be a perforated edge. You just tear those off. In the center of this weed mat, there's another perforated area, kind of an X. You just tear that open as well. Obviously, that's where the tree or shrub pokes through. You've got 4 landscaping staples to hold the weed mat down. A slow release fertilizer pack, should be enough reusable zip ties, 2 per tube. I actually prefer to put 3 on the tree tubes, but the kit itself only includes 2. And then this little pantyhose looking thing, which is a bird net. So I'll show you how this all goes together. What's not included with your kit that you're absolutely going to need to plant trees or shrubs is going to be some sort of stake to hold that tube in place. Now for shrubs, I run about a 48-inch stake. This is a steel tube that's plastic coated. These work fairly well. I've actually kind of switched to using a fiberglass stake that's got some texture on the outside. They're a little bit more flexible. So if something falls on them or a raccoon or something grabs them and bends them over, they just kind of snap right back. So I'm phasing these out of my planting process. I'm using them around my house right now. And today I'm going to be planting an American hazelnut shrub. And I'm actually right underneath a black walnut tree. But the hazelnut is jug loan tolerant, and it's a native shrub. Actually, a lot of native shrubs are jug loan tolerant. But it's not only jug loan tolerant, but it's also shade tolerant to a degree. The more sun it's in, the better it's going to produce. But this is kind of a partial shaded area. Once these walnut trees fill out and leaf out, then this isn't going to get as much sun. But as you can see, this hazelnut is already leafed out. So it's going to get a good head start before these walnut trees fill out. The other thing is it's a mass producing shrub. So I'm relatively close to home, so it's always nice to plant mass-producing shrubs as well as trees close to home so that our family can benefit from them if we get to these hazelnuts before the squirrels do. So that's it. That's the kit. I'm going to show you now how to plant it. I typically don't spray prior to planting. Twofold, I'm not a giant fan of spraying if you don't need to. And with the weed mat, that plastic weed mat, there's really no point in spraying. That will choke out and kill anything within about a 3-foot radius, you know, anything underneath the weed mat. So there's no point in adding those chemicals to the environment. Secondly, I don't really like to work in an area that was recently sprayed. That's personal opinion, personal preference. But yeah, so that's why I don't spray. What you do want to do is make sure that the ground is clear of anything sharp or pokey, or tall grass. So if this was out in a old field setting or CRP type situation, or even a brushy edge, I will typically run my flail mower over it, and that mows tight to the ground. The big thing is you just don't want to have little sticks or stubs poking up that are going to poke through the plastic and then regrow. Because a lot of situations you can mow over the existing shrubs. You know, if you have invasives like buckthorn or honeysuckle, if you can mow those tight to the ground and cover them with the plastic, they're not going to grow back. So having a flat surface with no sharp edges is really the key. This particular spot I mowed off last year, so it's just kind of grown back with some grasses and some sedges and some wood violets and whatnot in here, so nothing crazy. But what I'll typically do if I don't have a weed eater or a mower to do it, I just take my shovel and just kind of knock down whatever's there. You know, you can basically slice the existing vegetation off at the surface, but you don't have to go crazy with it. And that's about it. So once I have my surface prepped, I'm going to plant the shrub. And the key to planting your tree or shrub is to dig the smallest hole possible. You know, unless you're dealing with really compact soils, which case if you are, you're going to probably want to do more site preparation, run a deep ripper or some sort of tiller through there to really break up that subsoil. But otherwise, you want to dig the smallest hole possible so you're not getting any excess air or pockets of air in that ground that's going to settle over time. It's going to be a lot easier to gauge the depth of how you plant. This is pretty soft soil here, so I'm not worried about it. A little rock here, that's always fun. Now this is actually a transplant shrub, so you can see that it's fully awake and the root system is a little bit bigger. If you were to buy a bare root seedling, it would more than likely ship to you dormant and the root system wouldn't be as big. But I always just like to take the plant, again, tree or shrub, doesn't matter, eyeball and figure out how big of a hole I need. And then I'm only going to dig that big of a hole. Now another little trick that I've learned is if you have these split tubes, when you're digging out your hole, put your excess dirt on the tube because you always seem to run out of dirt. I've got my hole, put my shrub down in there, and then I'm just going to lightly break up that dirt and backfill that hole. I want to make sure all my roots are down in the hole, ideally pointing down, not pointing up. For the record, I do like to wear gloves while I'm doing a lot of planting, not because I don't want to get my hands dirty, but if you plant a bunch of trees or shrubs throughout the day, the soil draws so much moisture out of your skin that your hands are just bone dry and they'll crack and bleed after a couple of days. So I usually wear gloves, but obviously you don't have to. So I've got my tree or my shrub in the ground, not too deep. You can see that level on the plant where it was under the ground before, where those roots formed. The next thing I'm going to do, the fertilizer pack. So once you have your tree or shrub planted, before you water, preferably, because that will avoid a muddy situation, then just take your shovel. If I was standing up, it'd be easier. And just open up a little gap and chuck that puppy down in there. You want that to be about 6 to 8 inches deep and about 6 to 8 inches away from the tree or shrub. Do not put the fertilizer pack directly underneath your tree or shrub. What will happen there is that tree will find that immediately, and then it's not going to expand its root system nearly as quickly to find those nutrients. It'll get kind of lazy. This is another thing that's not 100% essential, but I really like to just water it in, let the water settle the dirt. I don't like to heel them in or stomp them in. I know I see guys do that all the time. I like to water them in, let that settle. And then the other thing is I'm just going to soak that ground really, really good before I put that weed mat on. And that weed mat's going to do a few things. First and foremost, it's going to hold all that moisture in the ground and not allow it to evaporate. So with the weed mat, you can get by about 4 to 7 weeks without watering your trees or shrubs. And if you're getting adequate rainfall throughout that 4 to 7 weeks, then you probably don't have to water them at all. In fact, I rarely water trees or shrubs unless it gets really dry. The second thing it's going to do is it's going to limit the competition. That's the biggest thing. If you have a lot of grasses growing around your trees or shrubs, they not only rob the nutrients, but they also soak up all the moisture before it even gets into the ground to where those trees or shrubs can utilize it. So it's going to kill and eliminate the competition without chemicals. And then the third thing it's going to do is, because it's not a permeable surface like a landscaping fabric or mulch, it's going to force that tree or shrub to grow its roots out wider a lot faster to seek that extra moisture. That's going to make your tree or shrub establish itself a lot faster. And I'm going to water this puppy in. Again, I just want to soak that ground, let that water pull that dirt down in and take out all those air pockets and just conform around the root system. I don't know how much this water can holds. I think it's probably 2.5 gallons. I generally do one of these, at least one of these per tree, and about 1/2 of one per shrub. Okay, so once my shrub's in the ground, fertilizer pack's in, everything's watered in, ground's settled. Make sure my shrub's not too deep, or my tree. If it is, give it a little pull, kind of work it up. You want that not to be too deep, and also you don't want any roots sticking out. Now that's done, next thing is to add my weed mat. This part's pretty simple. Just find that center, that perforated X. Now I only like to tear this open as much as I possibly need to. Because this shrub is actually a 2nd-year shrub that I'm transplanting, I have to tear my hole a little bit bigger. But you basically find that hole, and then I'm just going to take that tree or shrub, I'm going to bunch it up, grab my hand here, and gently work that through that hole. As long as you go slow with these things, if you feel the snags, you kind of work around them. Don't force anything. Try not to break off unnecessary branches. Just work that down. And again, most of the trees or shrubs that you guys will be getting will be a lot easier to plant. You know, a tree that's a dormant bare root's just going to be a whip, one single line. That's pretty quick. Most of the shrubs are whips too, so you shouldn't have to worry about that. But get that down, get your shrub centered in there, and then I like to pull on the opposite corners. Make sure that's centered so you get it where you want it. I'm going to come in here and put my landscaping staples in. That's not where I want it. Right there is where I want it. Just one staple per corner, nothing crazy. Push them all the way in so that the staple itself, the center of that staple, is actually putting pressure down on that plastic. And that's that. Then the next step is to add your stake. So that tube is about a 6-inch in diameter. So we want to be, roughly 3-4 inches away. Now what I try to do sometimes is I'll try to go into the corner of that plastic so I don't have to poke another hole into it. I'm going to find that. I'm just going to push that down, try and keep it as straight as possible. That's as far as I go. I don't hammer it in any further than I need to quite yet. Next step is to add the tube itself. And I want to show you a little trick. If I'm doing a lot of plantings in a day and I have these split tubes, I put them in the bucket. If you have them in a 5-gallon bucket, it helps kind of hold that steady for you. And then I just simply take my reusable zip tie, go through those holes, and get that started. And then overlap your edges. And do the same on the other side. And just make sure you're overlapping the same side, right? The same side is going over on the top and the bottom. The tubes will have holes in them. There's obviously the holes along the seam to hold it together. If it's a solid tube, the zip ties will probably already be in there for you. But it's gonna have holes on the seam, and then if you look at it, the upper half has the holes drilled in it. So when you see those holes in half, that's the upper half. That's for airflow. I just slide that over and get my shrub inside there. Once my shrub is inside there, then I'm just going to pull these zip ties tight. Again, making sure that everything's overlapped. And if I get this all done correctly, I can push the tube down tight, and that'll help hold the plastic down in the center. And you do want that tube as tight to the ground as possible, even potentially with a little bit of down pressure. So once I have that down, what I like to do with the shrub tubes, and it's different now, this is where we have that extra step. But with the shrub tubes, I like to leave a little bit of this stick over the top, but I will come in with a hammer and give it a little tappy tap. About an inch or so sticking over the top. And then the last step is your bird net. Now this bird net is going to stop cavity dwelling birds like bluebirds and such from trying to fly down in there to find a spot to nest, and then they essentially get stuck and they can't get out. So I'll slide this bird net over the top, and the reason I leave that stake stick up a little bit is I'll actually poke that through the bird net and then tuck it between the bird net, tuck the bird net between the stake and the tube, push that out in. That's going to help hold that bird net on. I will tell you straight up, these bird nets are notorious for pulling off of there, blowing off. So put the bird net on as a precaution, do whatever you can, stick the zip tie through it as well. Just kind of hook it through there. Anything you do to hold that on there is going to be beneficial. And the last thing you want to do is come out here and check these tubes and find dead birds stuck inside of them. It's added fertilizer, natural fertilizer for your tree or shrub, but it'd be a terrible way to die. So that's it. That's the shrub survival kit. Now I'll show you the one minor difference with the tree kit that you need to pay attention to. So here we have a kefir pear. This is a second year planting on this kefir. You can see kind of in a little bit of a secluded, more shaded area here. Trying to peel back all this honeysuckle and these invasives slowly and replant more mass producing or native shrubs in here. This is secluded, it's semi-shade. Pears do better in partial shade than any other fruit trees, so that's why I really like them. Kefir pears are pretty hardy. Talk about that more in another video, but what I wanted to show you was that last remaining step on these tree tubes. And you can see I actually must have forgot to put a bird net on this one, probably in a hurry planting that day, but I'll show you what the steps are to put that in there. So on the top of the tree tubes, you're gonna see these cut lines where it's split. All you wanna do is bend these all over. So just bend these over as far as you can go, all the way down touching the tube. They're gonna bounce back a little bit. But this is gonna do two things. It's gonna help hold that bird net on so it doesn't blow away. And secondly, when that tree does grow up out of that tube, at which point the bird net's no longer necessary because the birds can get out. But when that tree grows up out of the tube, it's not gonna rub on a sharp edge. So tree tube difference, fold over the top. So that's how the tree and shrub survival kits function. Again, the weed mat is great. You know, to be honest, I'm not a giant fan of having the extra plastic in the environment, but when you're out planting a lot of trees, this takes the place of the mulch, and there's benefits to it over mulch. Mulch is gonna be very carbon dense, obviously, and that's gonna pull a lot of nitrogen out of the soil, robbing that from your growing tree. Plants need that nitrogen to grow. That's their amino acids. That's what, you know, is the cell building blocks. So there's a benefit to using that weed mat, and they hold up for quite a few years. And by the time they start to tear apart, then the tree doesn't really need them as much. It's already well established, and then you can get rid of them. So when that's done, the tree tubes, again, we leave those on until the tree outgrows the tube. We'll remove it once a year and clean the leaf litter out, make sure there's nothing going on. If you do see them ever tip at all or they get bent over, you need to fix that situation right away, because if you expose the base of that tree, you're absolutely gonna have mice or rabbits or some rodent come in and girdle the bottom of that tree. So this will protect from rodents. It'll also protect from deer. With the shrub tubes, I usually leave those on 2 to 3 years. And then once that shrub is really well established, I will pull that off and I can reuse that. I mean, the tree tubes you can reuse as well, but the shrub tubes, I'll reuse those, recycle them a few times, and you get a lot of use out of them. They're pretty durable. The one thing I would say is don't mess with them too much in the heart of winter when they're really cold, because they will get a little bit brittle and they're easier to break, but for the most part, they're pretty good. So if you're interested in these tree or shrub survival kits, feel free to contact me. I'll get you set up. I do volume discounts and everything, but I'll get you set up with some pricing on that. And if you buy them from me when you're done with them, you know, so 2 or 3 years down the road, I'll buy them back from you and I'll reuse them on other projects. That'll save you a lot of costs. When it comes to planting trees and shrubs, about 50% or more of your expenses are gonna come from protecting that plant. But it's absolutely critical. You don't want to waste your time or your money putting trees or shrubs out there and then just have the wildlife demolish them. And if you have habitat like this that we're slowly trying to improve, your habitat's probably not offering a lot of good, diverse browse, especially for your deer. So they're going to take advantage of every bite they can get, and they will destroy them. I would rather see customers and clients plant 10 shrubs a year and pay the extra money to protect them than plant 500 of them and not protect any of them. Because if you plant 500 without protection, chances are 499 of them will be destroyed in year 1. So don't waste your time, don't waste your money. If you're not going to protect them, don't plant them. But there's a huge benefit to planting native shrubs and a huge benefit to planting native trees and or mass producing trees. So I know I'll get some beef for talking about an Asian pear, or actually this is a European pear. The kefir is a European pear, but it's mass producing, it's beneficial. This is right close to our house. We are planning on feeding from this, and then any excess goes to the wildlife. The wildlife love to eat them too. The blossoms are going to be good for the pollinators. The downside with non-native plants is that the native insects can't feed on them, and therefore the native birds can't feed on those native insects that would be on that plant. So that's a huge negative. That's why with all of our landscaping and all of our shrubs, we stick 100% with natives. We just throw in a few of these extra mass bearing trees here and there. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, thanks for watching. If you got some good stuff out of this video, please like and subscribe. Got a whole lot more good stuff coming your way. I'm going to try and bring you along on all these projects. Got some big projects around our little homestead here. And I've got a lot of projects going on client properties that I'm going to try and do a better job of explaining so that you can apply those same things to your property. So thanks for watching.